It is Friday, as we are just about to dive into week 10 of our Big Ten season conference play. And now I am dropping some Big Ten power rankings for you to nibble on as you await the first game of this weekend tonight between Minnesota and Oregon. So, starting off, kicking off our list of the top half of this week's power rankings of 9 through 1, I have Minnesota at number 9. And this is mostly by default of them having beaten much of the teams below them. And some of the teams they have beaten have also happened to beaten other teams below them. So really, I do not have much of a choice given the data points I have, even though I'm not very much impressed by them. And it is difficult because they have not blown out any of these lower tier opponents that they have beaten. They just kind of out-survive their opponents and outrush them a little bit and control the ball a bit more and win in the strategic way that PJ Fleck often does. They only beat a Michigan State team by 3, a bad Michigan State team by 3, Purdue by 7, and Rutgers by 3. Their one best win was against Nebraska by 18, though, where they had a sizable advantage in the trenches. But they got destroyed by Ohio State and Iowa doesn't really have better athletes. They just got pummeled at the line of scrimmage in that game against Iowa. So this seems to be a marginally good trench team relative to the rest of the Big Ten. Better in the trenches than their closest peers, but not anywhere close to the top tier Big Ten opponents. And not impressive very much at all in the passing game, even though they have made their efforts to be a more balanced offense this season. Next up on our list is Illinois. They were idle this week after they played Rutgers, beating them soundly 35-13 by a margin that you would expect them to. But they gave up less points than expected by a somewhat capable offense that can move the ball and put up points with Kaliakmanis at quarterback. Illinois only gave up 13 points to them, which is much less than the 28 points they gave up against a lesser offense in Purdue. And after how their defense got dominated by Washington the prior week, this might be a positive step forward for their defense, which has had its struggles this season. Luke Altmaier, just when you forget about him, he can show how talented he is and how much of a handful he is in the way that is kind of similar, in my opinion, to Demond Williams, where if he has time, he will either run and escape for a nice run or pick apart the defense and deliver balls into nice tight windows. So Illinois is a marginally good team that is well coached with a good quarterback, but it's just not talented enough in a lot of spots on the team to really hang with the teams I have above them that are more talented. And so next up at number 7, this is kind of weird. I didn't move them up or drop them just because Illinois is right below them, then you have Minnesota below them. And they're significantly better than those teams because they blew out Illinois, is Washington. And wow, I mean, what a huge letdown after a big and defining win for Jedd Fisch. And with the team being kind of in the playoff hunt, it looked like Washington had rebounded well after that Michigan loss when they beat Illinois. And they were headed for definitely a high-stakes showdown with Oregon. And for a chance, possibly a long shot, but it's still a chance to play at Indy if the other dominoes fell for them. But they certainly would have had a shot at the playoffs. And it seemed like they might have looked, I think, past Wisconsin, which is unfortunate. It was a rainy day with conditions that favored the home team. But nonetheless, a good team is supposed to adapt and overcome this kind of ugly game. Fortunately, this team isn't really good enough up front in their blocking to be that kind of team. Because Wisconsin's D line really put it to Washington, shutting down the run game and creating all kinds of havoc for Damon Williams. I have said it before, if Damon Williams is not contained and has time to throw, it usually spells disaster for a defense. However, if you're able to do what Michigan did and now Wisconsin has done, you can have a lot of success in stopping this offense. So let's give a brief moment to the Washington season because their run is now over. At number 6, I have Michigan, my Michigan Wolverines. Michigan was idle after a bit of a letdown performance against Purdue the previous week. As a Michigan fan who has more time with the bye to assess the situation with less emotion and has been listening to former coaches and former players from within the program give sobering analysis, I don't think the sky is falling as much as many other Michigan fans do. When it comes to the offense and Bryce Underwood, there has certainly been issues there. I'm not saying that Bryce Underwood has not taken a step back in his play the last 2 weeks after performing so well in the Washington game. But much of that is really likely due to his confidence in the offensive pass protection, which stems from issues most likely in blocking assignments. And no one outside the locker room and Schembechler Hall really knows how the system and chemistry works between Bryce and the offensive line, but it clearly needs to be improved. But the good news is I think that is a fixable situation. That is a realistic expectation during the bye week that the coaching staff should have figured out, hopefully by tomorrow against Northwestern. But again, we shall see. I don't expect Bryce Underwood to improve by leaps and bounds, but I do expect to see improvement more in his comfort level in the pocket, where he doesn't have happy feet or rushes throws or immediately leave the pocket when it is not necessary. It is important, though, that he develops at going through his progressions within the route trees by the time they meet Ohio State in about 2 weeks. So at number 5, even though they lost, I have Iowa ahead of Michigan because they are more veteran and have a stronger identity as a team. And they put up a great effort against Oregon. We can't sell them short on that. Now, I don't know how close this game would have been if it were on a neutral field or at Autzen Stadium, because Kinnick is a huge, unique home field advantage. But nonetheless, they played very well going by the eye test. It's a given that the defense is going to show up, but their offense production and execution has been a bit surprising at times this season, especially in this past game. Gonzalez was able to connect on a very accurate ball far down the field, and they also had a 93-yard drive on offense in this game. So it's a bit of a breath of fresh air for Iowa fans to see a somewhat competent offense that doesn't need to completely rely on their defense and special teams. So this is probably the best Iowa team overall that I've seen in these 2020s. It's unfortunate, though, that they didn't have a somewhat competent offense between 2021 and 2023 when their defense was really at their peak, even more elite than now. So great effort against a great team that where you barely came up short. But on the negative side, they are almost certainly out of the Big Ten championship and college football playoff races. Now, at number 4 is USC. And they had quite a scare as it looked like they were going to go down 24-14 and lose grip on the game to Northwestern. But that was before Maeva made that critical tackle for a fumble an inch from the goal line for a touchback. I really think if that didn't happen, it would have been at the very least a very tight game in the fourth quarter, if not a possible loss. Because at that point, neither team had momentum and neither defense could stop the other. Ultimately, I just think USC, though, had just more firepower and athleticism. And I do not think this is really a college football playoff team, quality team necessarily. I do not think their trench play isn't just good enough. It has been exposed several times this year, and it definitely got exposed by Northwestern in the first half. But credit to them for being able to keep winning and staying in contention. But really, they're kind of up there at number 4 on this list by default by beating Michigan and their record currently right now. But there is a sizable gap between them and the top 3 teams, I believe, on this list. So at number 3 is Oregon. And they had a very emotional and dramatic come-from-behind victory with a last-second field goal to win the game. Dante Moore was stifled most of the game, but really came alive with incredible clutch throw after clutch throw, moving the chains until they ended up in field goal range. Beating Iowa at Kinnick Stadium is not easy. They say it's the place where top 10 teams go to die. And they say that for a reason. But Oregon passed the test as they had the composure and enough mental and physical toughness to do so. But the most impressive thing to me is that 2 games in a row, they have been able to run the ball effectively at will at times against very good defensive fronts when they are not able to pass efficiently. It leads me to believe that they may have the best run blocking line in the Big Ten and perhaps even the country. Who knows? So I do think just because they lost to Indiana, that this team, I do not think that this, just because they lost to Indiana, that this team is not a championship contender. Because I like the way that they have been gritty in these last wins. I think it's really a matter of their receiving core eventually getting healthy, perhaps by the time the postseason comes around. So at number 2, I have Ohio State. I guess I'm bucking the trend because, it seems most people always have them at number 1. I really do not think they are the best team in the country or the Big Ten. They are certainly the second best, though, without question. Similar to every Ryan Day team, they have the best receiving core and they have the best secondary and one of the best linebacker groups this year. So they are hard to move the ball consistently on because of that. But what holds them back in my mind from being number 1 is their trench play. Their defensive line is good with no issues, but they don't really impress. I don't see them rush. I don't see them get to the quarterback really that often, as much as I would think that they should, given the amount of talent they have. But their offensive line is now becoming what seems to be not as good as their other position groups, but rather a potential weakness. They just cannot run the ball, and Purdue is not hard at all to run the ball on. In fact, they are probably the easiest team in the Big Ten to run the ball on. Speaking of Purdue, Michigan could not throw the ball against Purdue and had to completely abandon the passing game and exclusively only run on Purdue in the second half. And they could still do it with Purdue knowing that that's what they were going to do. And Ohio State, whose passing game has the most attention from any defense, could not take advantage in the running game at all against Purdue. And they really tried, too. They tried to make a point of running, but could not get hardly anything going. So I would be a bit concerned there if I were Ohio State. Mostly everything else, though, is so good. that it kind of shields this program at least up to this point. We'll see in the Michigan game. Number one is, of course, Indiana, and I think they're also number one in the country. So I disagree with most media outlets and the College Football Playoff Committee when they put Ohio State over Indiana during the first rankings and the second rankings. Does Ohio State have the better skill players in the outside positions? Yes, but Indiana has the better interior play, which I believe is more important. Just ask Ohio State these past 4 years against Michigan. And let's not sell Indiana's secondary and passing game short. Their pass offense is elite, but so is their run game. And they have the best quarterback in the Big Ten and probably the country at this point. Also, they have been just blowing out opponents in a way that no one is doing in the consistent way week after week that they have. And they have the best win in the country against Oregon, traveling 3 time zones on the road at a place that is incredibly difficult to win at. And they won by double digits even after giving up a pick 6. And games like this against Penn State, as I mentioned in the last video, Penn State actually has a more talented overall roster because they have more blue chip players and, more 4-star recruits on their team. But you can argue that Indiana's probably developed their players better, and Cignetti has an eye for productive players in the transfer portal. But nonetheless, you kind of were going to know that this was going to be a test for Indiana. And it really came down to Mendoza with his Heisman candidate performance. And they had 91 yards to go on to close out the game on a last drive. I believe there was maybe under, I think there was under 3 minutes. There was around 2 minutes, and they made it happen. And every great team is going to have games like this. They had one against Iowa, and they had one in this game, and they got the job done. So I give kudos to them because they're a team that has been legitimately tested where Ohio State really hasn't. And we don't know what Ohio State is when they actually get tested. So that concludes my power rankings for this past week, leading into this weekend and tonight. Hope you enjoyed. Like, share, and subscribe, please, because it really helps me out. That really helps me. I'm very new and helps my channel get off the ground. I don't only plan on doing this genre of rankings. I'm going to do things outside of sports too. So please like, share, and subscribe, comment if you want, and stay tuned. Thank you.